All right, so this week's parsha is Parshas Vayishlach, and reading the parsha this week, it really hits home when you think about current events, because the parsha discusses, chapter 34 discusses at length the abduction of Dinah. How Dinah was abducted. Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, was abducted, and how Jacob and his sons, or really Jacob's sons, were able to get her back using deception. And also then Jacob's son Shimon and Levi massacred the town that had taken Dinah as captive. Even though it's possible the whole town wasn't guilty. So it's the extent and the lengths that they went to get their sister back. Before we get into the actual close reading of the text of chapter 34 of Genesis, I want to point out that this is not the first time in the Torah that somebody is taken captive or hostage. We know that an earlier scene happened with Lot, that Lot was taken in Parashas Lech. We're told that Lot was taken captive by the four kings. This is in chapter 14, that they took Lot captive, and it says, "Vaychu at Lot vet kol rechushav." That they took Lot and all his possessions, and they went, and he was living in Sodom. They took him captive. And so when Abraham heard this, that his brother was captive, Vayarak es chanichav, he went out to war with 318 men, and he pursued them all the way till Dan, and he struck them down. And so there is precedent in the Torah for when somebody is held captive, immediately go out into battle to bring your captives back. But this case with Dinah was different, that they did not go out right away. They first negotiated. So let's look at this passage closely. And I was reading it today. I studied this passage for many years. Today I read it with the commentary of one of the great scholars, Nechama Leibowitz. I read it with her commentary, and she raised a number of very beautiful points with powerful sources. So we'll try to read this passage with her commentary as well, with Rashi and her commentary. Let me first review the story for those who don't remember it, who haven't looked at it since last year. Let me just review the basic ideas about this story. The story tells us, chapter 34, verse 1, that Dinah went out, and she was the daughter of Leah, which highlights for us the fact that very possibly there was some tension there over the fact that Jacob maybe was closer with the children of Rachel than the daughter of Leah. You see that his reaction is muted, and the rescuing of her comes from her brothers, Shimon and Levi, who are also children of Leah. And she went out to see the daughters of the land. So then Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Chivit, the prince of the land, took her, and he lay with her, and he violated her. Then he desired to take her as his wife, and he loved her, and he spoke to the Lev Hanara. He spoke to the heart of her. And Shechem said to Hamor, Shechem was the son of Hamor, says, take for me this girl. Jacob heard this, that his daughter Dinah had been defiled, and his children were with the cattle in the field, and Jacob waited until they came. And then Hamor went out to Jacob to speak to him, and the children of Jacob came home from the field when they heard this. And the children of Jacob were very upset because an outrage had been done in Israel to lie with the daughter of Jacob, and so should not be done. And so Hamor spoke with them, saying, my son Shechem desires your daughter. Give her to him as his wife, please. And you shall marry us, your daughters you shall give to us, and our daughters you shall take, and you shall dwell with us, and this land shall be before you. Dwell here and live here and do business here and acquire property. And Shechem said to his father and to his brothers, if I find Shechem said to her father and her brothers, if I find favor in your eyes, whatever you tell me, I'll do. So he said, give me a very high price to pay and I'll pay it. Just give me this young girl as a wife. And the children of Jacob responded to Shechem and Hamor, his father, with mirma, which Rashi says is wisdom, or with deception. Rashi says wisdom, but technically it means deception. Right? And he spoke to them because he had defiled Dinah, their sister. And they said, and they said to them, no, we can't do this to give you our sister to a person who's not circumcised. Here too, by the way, because they said it's a disgrace. Now they're responding as it relates to their sister coming to marriage. They're responding with deception, and of course that reminds us. Hold on, let me put in my AirPods. That reminds us of another person. That reminds us of another person who responded with deception rather than give his daughter straight out in marriage. And that was Lavan. Lavan said, I can't give you, well, that's not what we do in our place, to give the younger before the elder. But he says, but this is what you should do. You have to circumcise all your males. And then we'll give our daughters to you, and your daughters we'll take for ourselves. And we'll dwell with you and we'll be for one nation. But if you don't do this, we'll take our sister, take our daughter, and we'll go. And the matter was good in the eyes of Hamor and the eyes of Shechem. And the girl and the young man, i.e. Shechem, did not delay because he desired her. And he was more honorable than everybody in his father's home. So they came to their gate and they made a big speech and they said, these people, they're peaceful. They want to dwell with us and they want to do business. The whole land is in front of them. We'll take their daughters for our wives, and our daughters will give to them. But only this do you have to do. You have to circumcise every male just like they're circumcised. But their sheep and their cattle, it's all ours. We just have to do this, and then they'll live with us. And so they listened, and they circumcised every male. And it was on the third day when they were in pain, and the children of Shechem, the children of Jacob, the two children, Shimon and Levi, the brothers of Dinah, each took their sword, and they came to the city securely, and they killed every male. And Hamor and Shechem, his son, they killed by the sword. They killed by the sword. Hamor and Shechem, his son, they killed by the sword. And then they took their sister Dinah from the house of Shechem and they left. So Dinah was being kept in the house of Shechem. And then the children of Jacob came to the slain people, and they plundered the city that had defiled their sister. The sheep and the cattle and their donkeys and everything that was in the city, everything in the field they took. And they plundered everything. And then Jacob says to Shimon and Levi, you have embarrassed me. You have offended me to make me odious amongst the people of the land. And I am few in number, and everybody will gather upon me and strike me down. And the children of Jacob responded. It's not clear who responded. It was Shimon and Levi, it seems, but perhaps it was all the children of Jacob. They said, should they have been able to treat our sister like a harlot, meaning to say our sister was mistreated? We had no choice. I do want to say, before we go into analyzing the text, that there are two codas to this story. The first coda is in just a few verses later. It says in verse 5, it says that Jacob traveled with all his family, and there was a godly terror. Chitat Elokim al ha'arim asher svivotem. There was a fear of God upon the cities that were around them, and nobody pursued after the children of Jacob, implying that Jacob's children, even though implying that what Jacob said, that you're going to make me odious amongst the people, turned out to be a very bad prediction, because they not only were they not attacked, but they were feared. People feared their might. That's the first kind of coda. And the second kind of coda is at the very end of Genesis, when Jacob gives the blessings in chapter 48, or chapter 49, excuse me, when he gives the blessings to his children, he curses the anger of Shimon and Levi. And he says, Shimon, chapter 49, verse 5, Shimon and Levi, you are brothers, klei chamas mecheroteim. Stolen tools are your weapons. In their counsel, bisodam al tavonavshi, let my soul not enter. Bikalam al techad kvodi. With their congregation, do not unite, because in their anger they killed a man, and in their wish they hamstrung an ox. Arur apam, cursed be their anger, because it is mighty, and their wrath, for it is harsh. I will divide them up amongst Jacob, I will spread them out amongst Israel. And in fact, Shimon was the first tribe to disappear, and Levi was spread out. He didn't get a portion in the land. It's true that they were the holiest of Jews, but he spread them out. He separated them. And why was he so upset at them? It seems pretty clear that he was upset about this. Because that's how at least Rashi says this. Rashi says that Shimon and Levi were the ones who caused all the problems. They are the ones who sold Joseph. For example, Rashi argues that. And also he said that Jacob was upset. Hold on one second, let me see if he says that explicitly. Hold on one second. Okay, anyway, so Jacob curses their anger. Okay, so here we see, this is just a review of the story for those who didn't remember it, but there's this is one of the most ambiguous stories in the Torah, because we don't know 100% sure if the Torah is happy with the actions of Shimon and Levi, or they're happy with Jacob's actions, Jacob's passivity, Jacob's inaction. The Torah, God doesn't weigh in directly. Perhaps in verse 5, when it says that the people were afraid, maybe God is weighing in. But God does not weigh into the story directly to tell us, does God approve of what Shimon and Levi did? So we have to have a very close reading of the text in order to determine if God, according to the Torah, if God approved of the actions of Shimon and Levi. So let me just pause for a moment and see if anybody has any questions about anything we said so far. So I'd like to look at Nechama Leibovitz's commentary on this. And Nechama Leibovitz, first of all, discusses, she cites the Ramban. She's very interested in Nachmanides' interpretation of this story. And so this is her approach to this is how she cites the Ramban. I'll cite the relevant passages. The Ramban is so big, he writes so much, and he's very he's like a crucible. It's very hard to understand. Some people say it wasn't edited well. I mean, God forbid, but I'm just saying that it's very hard to understand. So when she pulls out specific passages for us to highlight, those are things we need to study. So she said on the verse that says that the sons of Jacob answered Shem with wisdom or with deceit. What is the verse says in chapter 34, verse 13? They answered him with deception. So how could they answer him with deception? How could they lie? We know that the people who are the enemies of the Jewish people lie, but we're not supposed to lie. So how could they lie? How could they lie? So Nachmanides writes, there is here a query, since it looks as if they answered in accordance with the will and counsel of their father, since they were in his presence, and he knew the implications, that they spoke with deception. So if that's the case, why did Jacob become angry with them later on? Furthermore, it's inconceivable that he would be a party to marrying his daughter to a Canaanite who had defiled her. Meaning to say, Avram said you can't marry a Canaanite. He said that to Yitzhak. For sure, you wouldn't be allowed to marry a Canaanite who's already defiled your daughter. So how could, he says, many have wondered how the sons of Jacob could come to committing such a deed as this to shed innocent blood, meaning they tricked them. Also, what gave them the right to kill all the people of the city? So this is some of the questions that Nachmanides raises. And so Ramban's answer to this question is that Jacob was convinced that the people of Shechem would never accept the circumcision proposal. That way he was silent. And he figured, well, we'll make such a dramatic proposal over the top, they'll never accept, and that way we'll be able to get Dinah back. But he then said at the same time, if for some reason they do agree to do the circumcision, all that will happen is we'll just come and take her on day 3. This was the plan of Jacob and all the brothers except for Shimon and Levi. Shimon and Levi, however, they weren't happy with just getting their sister back. They wanted to get vengeance. That's all they wanted. By the avenging sword, they wished to avenge themselves, and they slew the king and all the inhabitants of the city, for they were his vassals, and he was their lord. So the covenant by which they had circumcised themselves had no value in their eyes, since it had been made to flatter their masters. They were justifying. They said, we don't care that they circumcised. Jacob reprimanded them here for bringing him into danger. He said, you have made me odious amongst the inhabitants. I'll be destroyed. And later on, he cursed their anger because they have violated the treaty with the Shechemites. So that's what Nachmanides says, that it was initially the plan was just to either they'll refuse, or if they accept, we'll just get our daughter back. But Jacob never intended to do vengeance. That Shimon and Levi went rogue at the end. But before, and meaning to say that Jacob nor his sons ever contemplated this idea. So Ramban is limiting the sin to the sin of Shimon and Levi. Now, I also want to say Ramban, we know, was involved in polemics with the Christian bishop of the time, and he had to be careful. And this looks like, A, you don't keep your promises, the Jewish people, and also it looks like you want to kill all of us. So there, I think it's possible that's part of the reason why he wants to put all of the blame on Shimon and Levi. But before we go to your question, Bruce and April, I want to just say another passage from Ramban. And Jacob was further angered that the deed should not be attributed to his counsel, because that would be a desecration of God's name, that a prophet had committed violence. So Jacob, at the end of his life, wanted to say, I have no responsibility for their actions. He acted with deception, and I was not part of it. He says, so dumb. He says, I am not part of this. I am not part of this. And so that's what Ramban was saying. Ramban separates this from the actions of Jacob and his brothers. He attributes it all to Shimon and Levi. Now, hold on. Let me just say, I see Bruce or April has a question. Let me just pause for a moment. Yes. Okay, so there's another major dispute, as they say, Paka Ramban, Ramban's approach is to blame Shimon and Levi and Shimon and Levi alone, and to not justify the actions and say Jacob was completely divorced from it. I actually think that this is inconsistent with the simple reading of the text, which seems to place a lot of blame on Jacob for his passivity and his lack of feeling and his out of touch behavior. But I wanted to raise with you what a major dispute between Maimonides along with Ibn Kaspi and Nachmanides. And Rabbi Soloveitchik seems to borrow the approach of Maimonides, or to favor that approach. So it says that in chapter 34, verse 27, it says they plundered the city which had defiled their sister. So Ibn Kaspi, in his commentary, says, which had defiled, this puts paid to any moral objection, since the lawgiver himself testifies that they all had a hand in the crime, and he is a reliable enough witness. Meaning the Torah says the city had defiled their sister. They plundered the city which had defiled their sister, implying that the whole city was in cahoots with the defilement of their sister. As Ezekiel says, the variety of causes leading up to actions are only too familiar. Chapter 3, verse 18. You give not warning, nor speaks to warn the wicked from this wicked way to save his life. So this is the concept that the whole city was responsible. And indeed, Maimonides says like this. Let me open up Maimonides. Let me open up Rabbi Soloveitchik, because he refers to this passage from Maimonides. It says they killed every male. So Maimonides wants to justify this crime. So Rabbi Soloveitchik, he's writing in the 20th century, says the crime was committed by only one individual, Shechem. But apparently the brothers considered the brothers, he seems to be blaming all the brothers, or saying that it was done not just by Shimon and Levi, but by all the brothers, considered the entire town to be hostile to Jacob. If one commits a crime and the community does not ostracize him, or if one preaches bigotry and hatred and the community does not condemn him, isolate him, or try to eliminate him, then a conspiracy of silence exists, which is just as culpable as a conspiracy of action. So the society that allows crimes to take place and does not condemn them is committing a conspiracy of silence just as bad as a conspiracy of action. As Maimonides says in Laws of Kings, chapter 9, verse 14, it is for this reason that all the males of Shechem were deserving of death. For Shechem abducted, and they saw and they knew, yet they did not bring him to justice. So Maimonides is very clear that what's the reason that they did this action on the city? Because the city was culpable. They saw and they knew and they did not bring him to justice. The city was responsible. And that's why the verse says, and they defiled their sister. That's Maimonides. But Nachmanides completely rejects such an approach. Nachmanides says, it's completely unacceptable in my eyes. It's completely, though that's a quote. He says, it's completely unacceptable in my eyes. Nachmanides, rather than justify the actions of the brothers, Nachmanides isolates it to Shimon and Levi. Now, of course, this is really relevant. A lot of people are discussing this to this day. Like, how do we view the actions of a society where the leadership or the army seems to act in a way that's totally horrific? And what kind of communal responsibility is there? It's a very, very difficult question to even raise or to even discuss. It's very charged. And I'm certainly not suggesting that you take whatever the Bible says without a filter and apply it to any situation today, because that's never been the approach of the Jewish people. But I'm just pointing out that this was already a medieval debate between Maimonides and Nachmanides, two of the greatest commentaries. Then I want to make very clear, like some people want to say, there's a whole nother major discussion here, which is, what was the relationship? You can leave those there. You can leave the books there, Leon. Yeah. Because we're going to study with them in a little bit. Okay, got it. Okay. So the Malbim, we know he was a favorite of Rabbi Mintz. The Malbim was living in the late 19th century, early 20th, and for a while he was the chief rabbi of New York before going back to the old country. So the Malbim discusses a very serious question, which is what was the nature of the relationship between Dinah and Shem? I know that some people, write books about Dinah's behavior. They want to know, was Dinah an icon of feminism, that she went out? Was this a consensual relationship, to the extent that you could even have such a consensual relationship with a prince of the city and a woman? But look at the Malbims. The Malbim anticipated these questions, I think. And I want to read to you what the Malbim says, as said by Nechama Leibowitz, as she cites him. Here, that's your towel, Leon. Leon, right there. Oh, okay. So this is what the Malbim says. The text indicates that when he first took her, he had no intention of marrying her, as was his wont. He basically could take any woman he wanted, and he did. He took any woman he wanted, and he just took them, as was his wont. He simply grabbed her to satisfy his momentary passion. Had he been out to marry her at the very outset, he would not have raped her, but would have waited till they agreed to give her to him. Meaning to say, he didn't want to marry her at the outset, because if you really want to marry her, this is not the appropriate way to marry her. The appropriate way to marry her is not to first be with her, but to first negotiate for a relationship. Only afterwards did his soul cleave to her. There is a difference between emotional love and an intellectual attachment. A prince may be said to fall in love with a girl of low station, but there is no meeting of the souls, since the difference in backgrounds and culture precludes such a thing, though he may love her. But sometimes two persons of similar levels become intellectually attached to each other. There's a meeting of minds, even though no emotional love may exist between them. Here there was both, meaning to say he had the passion, and then he became intellectually attached to her. So at that point, hitherto, only animal passion had been involved, which did not deserve the name love. But at this point, because had there been true love, he would not have inflicted on her the terrible disgrace tantamount to murder. But now true love welled up after the animal passion subsided. Then he was sorry for having forced her. He spoke to her heart to comfort her from her sorrow and grief. So the Malbim takes a very creative approach. He says, at first he assaulted her, raped her, and afterwards he desired her. Of course, what she wants from the very beginning is never talked about in the story. Her voice is not here. Her voice is not spoken of. The text almost ignores it. The Midrash gives her a voice. The Midrash says she refused to go back, waiting to see what her options were. But the actual text gives her no voice. Rashi does seem to indict her based upon the Midrash by saying that Rashi seems to indict her by saying that she was a yatzanit. She was a girl who went out like her mother, because it says the word she went out both by Dinah's mother and by Dinah herself. So Rashi seems to take that approach, but the actual text doesn't. That's the great mystery. What was the actual relationship? What was the actual relationship of Dinah here? So, like I said, this is a passage that was controversial 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, and it's controversial when it happened, controversial all the way through history. And I kind of feel like this Shabbos in Israel, you're going to see people taking exactly opposite readings of this text to justify their politics, whatever will be their politics of the day, to justify either that Shimon and Levi are right or that Jacob's curse of them was correct. And I do remember when we studied this in yeshiva in Israel 30 years ago, the students arguing with the rabbis about the proper way to read this, the proper way to deal with somebody who takes a hostage. And of course, we know that, there's really no right answer. So it's just tears us all apart. All right, let's see if anybody has any questions here. I'm happy to discuss.